Welcome to the Redeemed Man podcast. I'm Nathan Dewberry, and I'm so excited that you joined us today. At the Redeemed, we're building a Christ-centered community of men where men don't just survive, but they thrive in their relationships and their walk with Christ. We also love to have meaningful conversations that will inspire us, challenge us, and bring us closer together. In each of our episodes, we dig into our guest stories, both their struggles and victories of faith. And today, I'm very excited to have with me Timber Cleghorn. Timber was, as a husband, father, wilderness survivalist, and was participant on Alone Season 11, where he captured hearts with his story. And definitely with the moose kill was a big deal for anybody who loves Alone and watches it. And it was great to watch and be a part of. My wife and I really love digging into the season, and we're so excited to have you on the show, Timber.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And after hearing what you guys stand for, I think that this is going to be one of those podcasts I really enjoy.
Well, we're so excited to have you. And before we jump into kind of your story with Alone, tell us a little bit about your family and what you're doing these days and where you're at.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got my wife, Kara, and 3 kids, Levi, Elliot, and a little baby after the Alone show, a little baby girl named Brooke.
Oh, congratulations.
And so thank you. Yep. We've been trying to serve the Lord in countries all over the world, mostly in Asia for the last 15 years in missions and humanitarian aid. And I think the two really run hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no better time to speak to someone about eternal life than when you're in a critical situation and people's homes have been destroyed, their lives have been upended, and so you're true. Like, we're here to, lend you a helping hand, to care about your life. And also, guess who cares about you most of all? Well, it's the Lord Jesus Christ, And so that's kind of us. We've been working in Asia and in war zones in the Middle East and stuff, trying to just be a helping hand to people. We think, what would Jesus do if he were in this world today? And we just want to try to emulate that a little bit. I don't think we always do a good job, but that's what our life is kind of centered around trying.
Well, I know you've got your hands full with little ones, and but I also know the great joy. Your wife also sounds like a very strong and supportive companion, and just a great partner in what you guys do.
Oh yeah, she is. I thank God for her. Without her, I couldn't do any of the things that we've done in life. She's my partner.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I would love to jump into a little bit of the story of your time on Alone. And one of the things that really struck me, so in your book, which I would recommend all of our guys that are listening, check it out. But in your book, it's really at the very start, you talk about your application to be a part of Alone. And one of the things you said that you prayed was, God, show me who you are, who I am, and what I'm supposed to do next. And then as you actually got the proof for the application and they said, hey, come on the show, you talk about in the book, you're stepping off the helicopter and you pray again, God, meet me here, speak to me, speak to the dead and dark places within me, give me clarity for what's next. What led you to that prayer, and why did you believe Alone might be a place where God would answer it?
Well, the wilderness for me has always been the place where I've found the ability or the opportunity to hear God's voice, because I really think God speaks in silence.
Yeah.
He doesn't come shouting at us with a trumpet most of the time. I mean, it's in the silence. But what brought me to that place was just being, you could say it, just lost in the weeds, lost in the sauce, because after a few years in certain particular war zones overseas, I was burnt out and done and began to wonder, like, is God good to people, to the oppressed people? Because you see so many of them and you pray like, Lord, deliver the people here, and then people dying anyways, and just surrounded by death for a couple of solid years. That were just particularly harsh, and you just get worn and your spirit stretched too thin, maybe stretched a little too thin in your faith as well. And so that's what brought me to that place of crying out to God and being like, what I want is just to reorient around eternal life, around life. Show me life again. And then And then, of course, to me, the wilderness was gonna be that place, because that's where it's happened to me before. I mean, that's where God's found me before, and that's really where my soul is at its most peaceful, the most peaceful state. I really belong in the wilderness, a creature of the wild, you know.
Yeah. And how many days were you actually in the wilderness when you were on season 11 of Alone?
I spent 83 days there, and might not sound like long, but when you start at the beginning of winter, it goes really deep into winter. It gets cold. 30 below zero is what I think it got down to. Lots of darkness. When I left the show, it was about 2 hours a day where you could just see, you know. And then as I waited there in the base camp, you know, getting some of one of their like health screening programs where they make sure you're good to go after the show. The darkness was complete. At the end of that, there was no more sunlight at all. So, yeah, I mean, I spent 83 days there on my own in the wild, and wish I could spend 83 more on top of it. It was so good.
What was the longest that you had spent alone before that?
Not more than a couple of weeks maximum. Maybe not even 2 weeks, because, you know, I've been away from my family an awful lot for months at a time, sometimes in one country or another. But not alone, you know, and in perfect silence. You know, imagine going through a month without hearing one single word spoken, right? And then knowing that we've just gotten started, and the second month and nearly the third month rolls by, and you haven't heard a word from a human being. That's a different thing. That's an interesting experience.
So I think when I think back to the prayer that you prayed, God, show me who you are, show me who I am, and then show me what's next for my life. There speaks to two different things. First is, you know, our understanding and view of who God is, which is super important. And I think oftentimes the reason people are misdirected is because they have the wrong view of who God is. And then the second part of that is oftentimes we have a misunderstanding of who we are, and our identity is rooted in something that we do, or not necessarily who God sees us as. And then the final part of purpose, as men, I think especially, but all people, we need to know that we're doing something significant. And as you shared, you had been doing so much work and yet still seeing a lot of loss, seeing, you know, pain and suffering. And I think all of us have to wrestle with those three questions in our life to understand more of who God is and who we are. And in that season, in those 83 days that you were away, what are some of the things that you learned about God in a new way? Or maybe there were things that you knew about him but had not really experienced. And then what are some of the things you learned about yourself?
That's a lot of question, you know. You cover a lot of territory there in that one question. So let's start with God. You know, God is so many things to us. And even, you know, we study the Bible, we study his word, and still we get such a small glimpse of the huge thing that God must be. And so on Alone, I learned to start with the most fundamental thing that he is to us, the creator. He made me with his hands, you know. And a few weeks into Alone, I had brought all my stress with me, I found. I thought the moment I stepped off the helicopter, I would just have peace. But that didn't take place for weeks, because we take our thought processes, our habits, our problems with us everywhere we go. But then, I mean, I saw this moose. After I'd killed my moose, I saw this moose in the fog, and it was so close to me, and I was astounded by its beauty, and it was like God pushed through to me right there and said, I'm the creator of that. And what must that moose do to earn its position as a creature of mine any more than just being what it is? And I contemplated on that for a few days, and then he said to me, you're the same. You're a creature of mine, you know. Start there. And so with Alone, that's where I started. Is the most, of all the things that God is, the number one foundation that he is to us is our creator. And that inherently just automatically, you know, it gives us value and a relationship and a responsibility and a friend, you know, and everything builds from there. So learning that about God, of course, I've known that all my life. I thought I've known it. I mean, through my teenage years, I went through a time of denial where I was angry and hated the concept of God. But I've known that. But then when you're standing in front of the Creator and nobody else and there's no other noise, you understand a little bit like what it means to be his creation. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because it means he was intentional about you. He made you just what he wanted to see, you know. And, the next step is to be redeemed back to his perfectness, like
Yes.
through
Yes.
Jesus Christ. That's a big thing. And then what I learned about me is that I've not been made perfect yet. I've got so many problems, so many of my thought processes that had me depressed and thinking that I even had PTSD or something. It was a sinful thought process, focusing on my own self.
Yeah.
To focus on oneself too much is a sinful thought process, I think, and it leads to a lot of insecurity, blindness, darkness, and that's what I started learning about myself, is that I'm not all that I think I am.
Yeah.
I need God to breathe life into me if I'm gonna live it right at all, And so I began learning about myself there, and then in the silence of the Arctic, I could afford to be honest with God and throw my hands up and be like, yeah, you're right. I've screwed up a lot.
Yeah.
I've screwed up a lot with my family, and being honest. I think honesty is the foundation of where we start to learn and grow, So that's where
No
God
doubt.
took me from that point there. About 3 weeks into Alone, I started real strong into that thought process and just started talking to God about it for the whole rest of the stay.
One of the things that you share in your book, and I think it even comes out on the show, of just being a private person and yet letting these people into your life, letting them into seeing those difficult moments, those challenging moments that you walk through. As you did that and you let people in, did you learn anything about kind of being more vulnerable and bringing that practice back into your normal life and going, hey, I do see value in kind of being a lot more transparent and living a lot more authentically? And not that you weren't before, but I think it's easy to kind of put on a front and hide some of those challenges we've walked through. But you were very transparent on the show, and you're in your book the same way. How have you seen that help you?
That was a hard hurdle to get over, looking at the camera. And I think it was very deep into the show before I really started being, transparent about the deep things.
Yeah.
I didn't start that right away because I just wanted to seem awesome, right? I just wanted to, look at me killing fish and moose and all this kind of stuff. And then I started to realize that without honesty about what that means in my life, it would never mean anything in anybody else's life either,
Yeah.
And God took me from that journey. I think it's what I said a minute ago. It's about being honest with God, being honest with oneself. And it felt so good to do that because, there's a truth spoken in the Bible. It says, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free, And if we can trick ourselves by hiding behind the construct of ourselves that we've built, and that inhibits our growth because we pour our energy into keeping up that construct, that I'm a this type of way, I'm a this type of person, And I'd presented this construct to myself that, I've done right so much. I know it's right to help people in countries like this, but I've done right so much that I've neglected for my own soul, with in some way in my relationship with God. And so it was a difficult thing to do, to start to be open. But then I learned that it's very healthy, I think, for men, for everyone. But I'm talking to men right now mostly because of, I hope there's people on this podcast listening who have been at war, who've seen death and destruction, and who can relate to these things. Honesty is the only true release, and it's the only true, path to healing, to let God heal, is to be honest. I remember being too afraid to look up at God and say, I'm starting to think that you're not good. But God knew that already.
Yeah.
And he
Exactly.
just, I should have heard myself say it earlier. I should have heard myself say it, because then we could deal with that, And so I think it was an important process for me, but then it was real uncomfortable thinking, what would happen with that honesty, with becoming vulnerable and talking about the deep places of the heart? I'm putting that in the power of the creators of this show. And what will they do with that? What will happen, And then as the show aired on TV, dealing with all the people that would somehow take the energy to look me up and text me a bunch of just crazy, awful things, all this cussing and all this kind of stuff, because of one thing I'd said about God or something I'd, messed up or something. it's a hard river to cross,
Yeah.
when people are mishandling the honesty that you've presented. But it is true freedom. It's okay.
I think that's a great point, Timber, is just that, you know, you are alive and healthy and functioning the way you should be, and have that right relationship with God where you're honest before Him, you're honest before those people in the relationships in your life that you value. And
Yeah.
what other people take with that is their choice. And they can turn around and wound you, but yet you can go, no, in Christ, I am whole, I am healthy, I'm what I need to be. And the people that are around me that truly know me, I have a great relationship with, and I'm thankful for what God's done in my life. And it's always important to go back to those things that we value most, especially when things are hurled at us that really are, hurtful.
Yeah.
But you can go back and go, I am free. Like I don't have anything to hide, and I know who I am, and I know what I believe in. With that time of solitude, you had so much time to think about your life and process your upbringing and then think about your relationship with God. Did you bring a new practice into your life with more time with solitude, or how does that look? Because I mean, living in the modern day world and even being overseas in different areas like technology, like what we're doing now, like it's a great tool, but if you're not careful, it quickly like seeps into controlling all areas of our life to where we really don't have solitude. So are there some practices that you've continued to implement in your life?
There's a couple things that I would point at for sure that I've added to my life as something I hope to never, like a non-negotiable. I have to do this.
Yeah.
And this might be just for me, but the first thing is when I wake up in the morning, I have to orient my heart to God before I turn on my phone. Because once I turn on my phone, most of my stress comes out of my phone. There's people overseas hollering at me all the time. We need this, you've got to do this, ask folks, or pray, or just good things.
Yeah.
But it's really stressful. And folks at home, can you help me do this on such and such a day, or blah, blah, blah. And if I turn on that phone first, I've lost a battle that day. And it's very difficult for me to pray to God and for my mind to be wholly oriented to Him. Instead, in the back of it is all that to-do list and all that, how am I going to explain this in this language to this person, And I feel that I'm not alone. Probably a lot of guys have the bulk of the stress comes out of the phone. So for me, the first habit is I try to take time. I look at my phone, and my hand wants to turn it on and see what's going on when I open my eyes. But I've committed that I won't light that screen up until I've talked to God and asked Him to anchor my heart in Him today and to orient myself towards Him, that I would walk with Him, and then I turn the phone on. And yeah, it's still stressful and all that kind of stuff, but I just think I'm better prepared for it. To hold myself in a balanced way, if I've done that first. So that's one thing. And the second thing is I try to let the first words that cross my mouth in a day be praise. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. I'm glad for the day that you've put me in to live, and I want to walk with you. And then the last words in the evening, as I lay down to sleep, to be like, God, I noticed that you were good to me today. I noticed, so find me grateful, and I bless the Lord, And so those two little habits have helped me. And without being on the show or forget the show, without being silent in the Arctic for months, talking to the Lord, I don't think I would have added that to my life in a committed way. I've dabbled in those things before, and then they just come and go in my life. It's hard to keep a commitment like that when the phone is so demanding in the morning. When you turn it on, you got to solve all kinds of problems. Because for me, the problems happen at night, and they come into my phone at night because they're from other countries. So if I'm over there, they come from here. If I'm here, they come from there, and it's all happening at night. So my phone is loaded in the morning.
Yeah.
But everybody's phone will be that way somewhat, and so is the news. So that's my commitment. Those are the two core habits that I've tried to add and hope to never lose, because it's been a golden thing for me. It's helped me.
I think that's a challenge for all of us. I know, the pull of our phone to stay connected, to hear from others is constant. And
Yeah.
I think the principles that you developed is so important to go, I'm going to define what impacts me, and I'm going to decide what I allow into my life and when I allow it into my life. And I think for each of us, we have to look at our life and go, what are those things that are challenging us? What are those things causing stress and anxiety? How are we handling those? And on top of that, how are we going to God and truly putting him first and foremost and truly trusting him with them versus trying to handle it in our own strength and our own power. And it's so easy when you don't orient yourself toward him and toward the things of him, then those things start coming and we start trying to handle it in our own strength and our own power. So great habits to have in your life. And I think I would just challenge anybody who's listening to go, what are those things that you need to put into your life and go, I'm going to commit to this, and not only commit to it, but share it with somebody, just like Timber shared it with our audience. Find somebody to share it with, to hold you accountable, to say, hey, you've made a commitment to this, stick with it. Because when you have somebody that's doing it with you or going to check in, it's much easier to live that out. It's much easier to stick to it.
Yeah,
Timber,
we can help one another. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. You talk about another part of, as you're going into alone, of this, I don't want to fail, and I don't know if I can handle failing. And you talk a lot about your journey growing up and some of the suffering and then some of the things that you faced with family and difficulty, and then also with what you had been doing with your career. What has suffering taught you about the character of God?
You asked the biggest questions here, man. I mean, there's only complex answers to these, but I would say that suffering, I don't consider that I've suffered too greatly, just because, I've been around a lot of other people who, it's their children that have been killed or their parents that have been killed in a bomb strike or one thing or another, and I think I haven't suffered that, so I count myself blessed. I don't think I've suffered too much, but any suffering that has taken place has brought me to a point every time where I could blame it on God or see God being with me through it, As God has given the choices in this world, over to people who could use it for cruelty, wickedness, or for goodness, he still stands by to support and fill everyone who calls on him for life, for the strength of your soul, and every time suffering, it brings me back to that point of being like, well, God, how could you allow this to happen in such a world when you're good? I know that what you've created is good, and yet this is going on. And you'd think that suffering time and time again would make it to where you don't ask that question anymore. Yeah. You're just grounded and And in some part of you, yes. But in another part of you, every time it pushes you to the edge and you're like, where is God? Yeah. I think it's okay to be there on the edge. Yeah. It's okay, because David cried from that point many times in Psalms. I was just listening to Psalm 44 this morning where he said, even though we've kept your word, you've pushed us to the point of defeat and despair, And that's what suffering has done for me, is it taught me that every time I get to the edge and every time I reach out in desperation to see if God is still real, it bounces back with a resounding yes for me. And that's what it's taught me, is that get to the bottom, suffer, go to the depths to where you can't fall any lower, and cry to God and be like, I don't even know where you are. And let the answer come back. I'm right here. And don't be afraid of losing your faith, because if God is real, you'll grab it each time you're desperate and reach out with all your heart, and let it keep bouncing back with a yes answer. God says, I am here. I see you. Yes, I know you're suffering, and I can't step in because I don't know why God doesn't step in and just save us from all the suffering each time and all the pain. But he doesn't. But he says, but I'm here, and I see. I see. And sometimes when we're asking for a friend, we call a friend on the phone. You got to keep in mind, we're not asking for the friend to solve all of our pain. We're just asking for him to listen and to see and to know that it's been painful. We got to understand that that's just what God does too as a friend. You don't always call God and be like, save me from everything, and then boom, it's over. But when you ask, do you see what I'm going through? And God's like, oh, I do. I do see it because I'm right there. That's suffering. I think that's my process each time through any period of suffering, I think.
Timber, I think that's so well put. I don't know that I've ever heard someone talk about that in reality of how we want to just be with our friends and have them here and validate that they see us. And I think that's so important to understand that about God, that he is seeing us and he's there. And I love how you kind of unpackage that in your own journey. And I think each of us have to come to, how do we reconcile God's love and God's presence with the suffering around us? But it does go back to, do we believe and do we trust him? Or do we feel like we've got the answers in the better way? And I think, I would say that, time and time again reveals that we don't have the answers and we fall so short, but we can trust a God who says he knows and says he's working for our good. And we can trust him in that, even if we can't fully understand how he's doing it or why some of the things around us are happening. In your season on Alone, what were some of the most challenging moments that you faced along the way?
By far the most challenging crisis was when I had this moose, like 700 or 800 pounds of meat in front of me, and then the weather suddenly warmed up for a solid week up into the 50s, 60s, and I'm like, why? It's not supposed to be like this. It was getting colder, it's doing the Arctic thing, and then I kill the moose and immediately it warms up, and then I had to be like, God, you got to help me or I'll lose all this meat. And then what kind of a look will that be? What kind of a testimony will that be? And then you're only allowed to kill one moose. If it spoils, what am I going to do for the winter? And that threw me into a big challenge. That was by far my biggest challenge, just physically, right? And then I just prayed to God, please help me get it done, and make the right moves and get it done, and when it was done, I remembered I had begged God for this moose. And now, throughout that process of smoking the moose, I realized if I had just fished instead, I would have spent no energy. I would have had plenty of food because there was fish everywhere. And I was like, but God gave me what I asked for anyways. And
That's
sometimes I don't know what to ask for. Sometimes I don't know what's good for me. But sometimes God will anyways look and be like, well, okay, I'll give that to you, but it's going to be hard to handle. It may not even be good for you, but here you go. And that's what God had done. If I hadn't killed the moose, I'd have been in even better shape by the end of the show, because that week nearly killed me. I walked about 30 miles carrying that moose meat, worth like a maniac to smoke it all. It was so stressful, and barely ate the whole time. I lost all my condition, during that week, and then realized, if I just chilled and let be, I'd be in even better shape, right? But anyways, God had heard my voice. When I went after that moose, I was like, Lord Jesus, as you look down on me, I said, let me kill this moose. And he's like, okay, all right, man, but it's going to be tough. And it was, because of that hot weather. That was a big crisis, and I prayed a lot through it, learned that, a lot of my limitations through it, a lot of my weakness through it, that freaked me out. I don't like to be confronted with any of my weakness, you know. And we men, we don't like to be confronted with our weakness. But then spiritually, the biggest crisis was in basically getting through that. Can I be open about what's going on with me spiritually, or will I be slaughtered for that? Can I handle that? So that's the crisis points, man.
I just want to say, as somebody who watched the show as a believer, I mean, it was very encouraging because I think, one of the things that was, I personally think, again, I don't know what the editing process looks like for the TV show, but I thought they did a very good job of letting you be you and show your story and reveal your trust in God, and yet at the same time not take away from it or limit that or make it look in a negative way. That's one of the things I love about the show, is because you really get to see really who people are. Because there's no hiding when there's a camera showing you when it's difficult and you're in a cold place and you're alone, and you're they say in counseling, like, be aware when you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Well, most of the time that was the case for however many days each of the participants were there. And so you really see them in their, natural state of where are they depending? Are they depending on their own strength? Are they depending on somebody else? And it was very evident that your prayer life played a key role in your experience and how you saw each opportunity. You prayed as the show started. You consistently prayed for provision, and God provided. Was your prayer life as strong going into that, or was that a season where it really grew immensely?
I got to be honest about this. I had my prayer life had gone through quite a struggle building up to there. I had come to the point where I said, you know, we've been in these war zones. We've been like seeing so much destruction. I just want to hear the basics from God. I don't want to do any complex prayers, you know. And so I had just, for months before that, I had just quit doing any normal thing that you'd think was for prayer. And I instead each day just said, God, how did I phrase it at the time? You know, just that prayer, just show me life and let me be your man. When you look down at the world, let me be your man, you know, because I didn't want to lose connection. I knew it would be there at some point, but I was just like, you know, I don't sense your presence, you know, but I want to be your person. When you look down and you say, that's my man, you know, I was like, let that happen and show me life. And I had just abandoned any other prayer life, I think, besides that. I just said, I'm just going to say that every day for a few months. And then my prayer life had gone through that terrible struggle, you know, up to that point. And then I got on the show and I began to, in the still quietness there, for God to hear God say, hey, I do hear you.
Yeah.
Listen, I do hear you. But, you know, he showed me that I had to change some things about my own perspective in order to grow past that point, and in order to be able to see that he was hearing me and that he was good, and he was perfectly willing to look down at the world and see me with his eyes, you know. So took me changing to make that prayer life, you know, move on to the next step, you know. I just wanted God to do it all for me, come and fill my prayer life back up with amazingness, but it took me changing a lot, and that was a hard process.
Well, for those who are listening that may not know, you did not win the season. You came in second, and a lot of people would go, man, that was a failure. But I remember the moment when you're talking about and you're picking up the phone to call, and kind of that realization of what was most important for you. Kind of walk us through that, of how you realized, and then the piece that you had of like, what I came here for, I've received, and more than actually what I thought. And it wasn't about the money. It was about an encounter and an experience that you had.
Yeah. That's a tough one. I think about that every single day. So about halfway through, about day 40, 41 or something like that, I was when I think I fully let go to what God had been trying to tell me. And he's like, I'm showing you life. I'm doing what you asked for. I'm walking with you every day, you know. And I was so enthralled. And from then on, every day was just like a joy of walking with God, and praying was easy. And I would just lay there and for hours, because, you know, you got 20 hours to lay in the sleeping bag at some point, because it's darkness, constant darkness. You got 20 hours to lay there. And so I would spend at least 10 hours of that. And I just talk with God and, you know, and say things and just try to, I forgot about it even being prayer, because I didn't, you know, eventually you have to drop some of the Christianese, the phrases like, you know, you know, the phrases that we typically use in prayer, and just talk as a friend. Like, what do you think about that? Tomorrow, I think I should set a snare over there. What do you think? Should I do that? Is that a waste of energy? You know, and I would talk, and then I'd pray about other things in the world. God, my friend in Tajikistan, who's in a desperate situation, you just look in on him today, you know, and you know, stuff like that. And my days were so filled with satisfaction in my soul because of that. Came a point in time on day 82 or something like that, I'm like, you know what? My soul has been so filled, so satisfied with what God is, that, you know, what is the point from here on? What am I doing from here on out? And I'm like, but I want the money, and I want the more than the money, I want the position of having been the man, right? And I'm like, well, where does that desire come from? That desire doesn't come from a satisfied soul. That desire comes from an insecure soul hoping to prove that he's something, right? And is that what I am? Or am I a satisfied soul in God, knowing exactly who he made me to be? Win or lose, it doesn't change anything. I am who I am. And I had that big discussion. It was a terrible, hard discussion, because my flesh said, I cannot be happy unless I win. And then my spirit was saying, that can never make you happy. If you're not happy unless you win, you won't even be happy if you win and if you get all the money. And then I had all these other arguments about, like, what about the money? What if I win this money publicly and then it changes my relationships with all the people that I'm among overseas, because they no longer would ever see me as, hey, you're Timber, my friend. They're like, you're Timber with $1 million. And it would just happen in the back of their mind. But it would put such a gulf between us. And that was excruciating. And that was the point where I'm like, I know what I need to do. I need to not win. And that was a horrible thought. So I cried about it all one night 82. And I was like, God, I can't do this. I don't have the strength to pick up the phone and tap out for these reasons. You got to give me peace in my heart if it's going to happen at all. And it did. He did. And I had so much peace. I woke up the happiest man that's ever been alive. And when I called on that phone and I was like in tears, and like my wife was waiting for me at base camp and I didn't know this. And I said, I'm as happy as I've ever been. I meant it. And that lasted all the way through until I watched that last episode on TV. And then I was real challenged again about my choice. Real challenged, because we could have been legends. We could have stayed out there to 150 days. We could have totally been legends. But I was convicted that I need to not win because of that.
Well, and I think God has gotten the most glory from that, because there's an opportunity like this to be able to say it wasn't about winning. It was about knowing that I was satisfied in Christ alone. And you sign off at the end of your book, Timber, the Satisfied. And I think for each of us, that's a great question of, are we satisfied in Christ alone? Or is there something that we're striving for, seeking to achieve, a goal that's there that we have put all of our identity in? Is it performance, or is it we're satisfied in Him and who we are and the purpose that He has for us? And as you prayed that prayer at the beginning, I think that prayer was fully answered, in the end, that no, you don't fully know God, but you knew God in a deeper way. You knew more about who you were, and you had more clarity about the purpose of your life and the freedom that God had brought you, which, man, what an amazing prayer to pray and then have answered, and be able to experience that through a grueling challenge, but at the same time, a very rewarding challenge that taught you a lot about who you are and who God is.
That's true, man. God has been so good to me to allow that in my life. I can't imagine something else that could have showed it to me more clearly than letting me just be a wild man out there in the wilderness during that time. I was lucky because like 30 or 40,000 people wanted to be in my place there. They applied.
Yeah.
And God was just so good to allow it to be. And then since then, I've talked to a lot of men who are struggling, and they'll be like, I hear you about this whole satisfied soul thing, being happy about who God made you to be. I hear you, but I've never felt it. And what are you talking about, And then I keep thinking, What do you say? Because you can't give someone a recipe. Do this and this and this, and you'll be satisfied. You can't give someone a recipe. You can't tell them, get on a loan and talk to God for 3 months, and you'll be satisfied. You can't do that. But that's the trick about God, is there's no recipe. But there is this.
That's so true.
If you haven't found the satisfaction, you got to find it in God. You got to ask, and you got to seek with all your heart. And then if the God I believe is actually real, He'll meet you there. And it'll take time, but you'll find it in God. Our life is hid with Christ in God. I believe that with all my heart. And there's no recipe, but you got to find it in God. You got to ask God and be like, God, I want that. I want you more than I want air to breathe. I think we got to start there as men. We got to start there because it's a vulnerable sounding place to be, and we don't want to be there as men. But we're not all that we think we are. We're weak. And we got to ask God, I want the life that you imagined when you formed me with your hand. And I want it more than I want life or breath. And I wish that we could all condescend and start there and then find our soul in God. That's,
Timber, your passion is evident. And I think that was something too throughout the show, of just your passion for doing things well, your passion for life and living it to the full, and evident now more than ever your passion for Christ and for other people to experience what you've experienced. And I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for sharing a little bit of that story. We could talk so much more, but the last thing I'd love to do is, just as we wrap up with what you and your family are doing, how can we pray for you? What are some of the things that we can do to lift you up and support your family in prayer, knowing the work that you do? Because I know it is hard and it is challenging, but it's also very rewarding.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking that. And so my family, we're going through a bit of a transition because it's getting very hard to meet our family's needs while living in, a conflict zone or an extreme place like that with the ages that our kids are. So we're moving into where we're going to spend more time for them in the States, and then I'll be over there in those zones more. There's a little bit of separation there, but as the years go by, my wife will be able to go with me each time again, and that's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to make the call about how much to be gone from the family. So we need prayer about that, those wisdom in those calls. And also, man, it's just so hard to pay for all the things that we do, and we just are. I'm just like working, and asking God, like, anything that you put in our hearts to do to, for this mission work and aid work and for helping people in conflict zones, just God's always been faithful, and I know that he will, but I sometimes panic. I'm like, I don't know how we're going to make all the ends meet there. But I think the decisions and the walk with God are even more important than that. So I appreciate that question. And our family, just from my whole family, we really appreciate it. And for each person that's reached out, especially after the show, and been like, thank you, or I saw something that stirred me to think about God. I just want to thank everybody that's sent a message. There's plenty of negative ones, but there's been a lot of positive ones. And I want to thank everybody, everybody that would say a prayer for us or think about us in any way. It's a big honor.
Well, I've got to say, too, if you watch the show and enjoy it, go check out the book, or if you just want to hear more of his story, great read. You get to learn more about the experience that he had being alone, but then also his faith journey. So great book. Thank you, Timber, for joining us on this episode today. It was a joy and a pleasure, and we look forward to hopefully hosting you again at some point.
Thank you. It was real wonderful to be on here talking with you today. You asked the questions that I actually care about. A lot of people ask about, well, what was it like to, find a broken fish string and a hook stolen off it, little survival things like that. And that's fun. That's enjoyable. But the questions that you dwelt on today are the things I care about the most. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And God bless, man.
God bless you as well. Thanks so much.